Yep, and now it says that it's recording.
Cool.
All right. My name's John. I was raised Catholic. Um, I started having doubts when I was in high school and probably became agnostic at that time. And then I'd say probably, I don't know, 15 years after that, I became atheist. I've been atheist now for the last, I don't know, 15 or 20 years.
Uh, Hello, my name's Corey Dugas, and John and I are about to jump into a conversation on faith here. I come from more of a faith background. I grew up Catholic as well, although I currently go to a Baptist church, but have kind of been in a couple different denominational backgrounds, exploring the different views and doctrinal differences. And I enjoy having these conversations. So we're going to jump into a topic today that's pretty straightforward. It's just two different perspectives on what faith looks like, how it's perceived from maybe a skeptical view and then from a Christian worldview. So this ought to be interesting. It's our very first recording, so we'll see how it goes. Thank you for joining me, John. You've been a tremendous help so far, so this is going to be awesome. I'm excited.
As am I.
So let's just maybe start with what, from your perspective, how do you view Christians or religious people in general when it comes to their idea of, hey, you just got to have faith, you just got to believe? What are your thoughts on that? And please be straightforwardly.
No.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, so I understand exactly what you're saying with that. The thing that gets me about faith or believing is I don't think we get to choose what we believe. The way I've asked this before of other people is, could you decide to be an atheist for the weekend, or a Muslim or a Jew for that matter? Could you just decide to change what you believe? I don't know that that's an option available to us. I don't think that I could just decide to believe. I've read um, portions of the Bible. I certainly haven't read the Bible cover to cover, but I've read portions of it. I'm currently working on the New Testament. I just read Mark 2 weeks ago. I'm working on Luke right now.
You're a step ahead of most Christians.
Well, so that was one of the things that struck me about being raised Catholic. I don't think I was ever encouraged to read the Bible that I can, not that I could ever recall. But as I've been reading through this, it doesn't resonate. It's not something that strikes me as true. The comment that I made the other day is there was an awful lot of demonic possessions. That, when I read Mark, it sounds like they were casting out demons at every other afternoon. And it's something that either was miscategorized or was embellished. And so it's not something that I'm reading and saying, oh my goodness, this sounds like the truth. This sounds accurate. I don't think people, as I'm going through this, I'm absolutely not accusing people of lying. But these old stories, these weren't even written by eyewitnesses. And so as I'm going through it, and I've been told, just have faith, you need to decide to believe. I don't know that that's much of an option.
Yeah, that sounds silly.
Yeah, and so therefore, I don't know if, I doubt that that's an experience unique to me. I think that that's what people are going through for themselves. I think it seems that they likely were raised with a religion that they wind up believing in because they've been told it for so long. Or in my case, that you doubt religion and you are unable to just, I don't know. I don't know that I could just make a decision on that front.
Yeah. Okay. So I think that's a great kind of lead in, because it gives us a picture of kind of the perspective of someone who's a little bit skeptical from the get-go. And then when you read the quote unquote evidence, it doesn't sway you. And so then at that point, what do? Like you can't just strain real hard and will your way into it, type of thing. I think that there's a lot to that. I have friends of mine that have expressed similar, struggles with doubt or whatever, and I encourage doubt. I think that it's good to kind of ask those questions and maybe be a little bit skeptical, as long as you come across from the perspective of I'm looking for truth, and not I'm looking to prove something right or wrong. Your bias kind of overwhelms your will, but not saying that's what you're doing at all, but I'm just that's from a Christian perspective, that happens all the time. Okay, so here's what I think we should do. I think we should define faith from your perspective, and then we can look at the dictionary definition and we can kind of kick that around, because I think at the root of or in whenever I'm talking to skeptical people, whether they're just kind of agnostic or full atheists or searching, there is a lot of misunderstanding with what faith is, and I think defining it may help us kind of advance the conversation. So what do you think when a Christian says you just have to have faith, what do you think that means?
I have always taken that to it's a good question. I've always assumed that what they meant by that was you simply must believe. And maybe that's part of the sticking point or part of the problem. Because like I said, I don't think that you can make a decision on that front. So it strikes me as becoming convinced, allowing yourself to be convinced. I'm using a lot of passive voice here, but that's my understanding of it.
Yeah, that's interesting. Like, whenever we are, so that is kind of like faith is the tipping point for you for being able to ascend to a claim or acknowledge a claim to be true or false. Like, it's the tipping point.
Yeah, I would say, yeah, it strikes me as once you have faith, you are now
a believer.
A believer, exactly.
Yeah. Okay,
exactly. That's what I would think.
Yeah, okay. That's an interesting way to look at it. So let's look. Let me see. I think I have the Merriam. I'll jump through and read this quick quote. Michael Ramsden, he's a Christian apologist. He's actually has a great British accent. If he's another guy, I recommend you checking out if you get some time. He has some good YouTube videos. But it says, nowhere in the Bible is faith described as a leap into the darkness. It's always a stepping into the light. And what happens when you move from darkness into light is you can finally see everything more clearly. So it is, for him, it's kind of the tipping point as well, similar to what you're talking about. But he's kind of making a claim that first step is a little bit unknown. And so you step into the unknown, but it's not doing so without any type of assurances that you're going to remain in that state, right? Like your first step is a little bit uncertain, but then when you get there, then you start to see things more clearly. But that's a whole nother, that might be like level 2. Let's go back to the original or to the quick definition. I'm trying. Let's see. I'm looking for the Merriam-Webster. Here it is. Can you see that? Okay, it looks small. So, faith defined, typically, we see that it's allegiance to duty or a person. Fidelity. It kind of comes from the root fidelity. There's also, if you kind of look down, belief and trust and loyalty to God. And then complete trust. That's kind of how I define faith is trust. So if I have faith in a doctor, that means that I trust that the doctor is going to be able to accomplish what the doctor is being hired to accomplish. Or, if I have faith in a pilot, it means that, when we take off, they're capable of landing safely, that type of thing. Now, there is, like in definition number 2 here, you can see that there's the trust and loyalty to God. But then here's the definition that I often get: a firm belief in something for which there is no proof.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, is that something that you hear other atheists kind of characterizing faith with? Is that, I don't want to.
Yes, and that's I think that's probably the definition that I would most agree with from Merriam-Webster there.
Okay, so I think that first off, I don't have any issues with a firm belief in something for which there is no proof. But I think what most of the time, and I don't remember if I did a Facebook post a week or two, I'm sorry, a month or so ago, and it was kind of about this. I don't know if we were Facebook friends yet or not, but it talked about how there is a clear distinction between proof and evidence. And a lot of times what happens is that word proof there gets, we hear that a skeptical person will equivocate on proof, and they will switch that to evidence or use them interchangeably. And so what happens is that they'll read faith as firm belief in something for which there is no evidence. And
I see what you're saying. Mm-hmm.
That is a distinction that I think is an incredibly important one, that I can say that Christian faith is a firm belief in something for which there is no proof, but I can't say that a religious or Christian faith is a firm belief for which there is no evidence. And that's where I think we can, I want to have evidence for the, why I believe certain things. I don't want to blindly, I'm trying to remember who it is. It's is it Richard Dawkins or Sam Harris or one of those guys that they equate faith with blind faith. And
right.
If faith was actually blind, you wouldn't need the qualifier blind faith. You would just have to say faith. But it's not blind. We use faith, faith in doctors, faith in our political leaders, faith in, that there is a past history or evidence for which we're basing that faith. And so that distinction is an important one. What are your thoughts? I'm going to shut up and let you kind of comment. I'm sorry.
No, I excuse me. That's an excellent point. There is, so that would change, and it would suggest the definition then of faith is belief in something for which there is insufficient evidence. Because if there was sufficient evidence, it would no longer be faith, right? It would simply be belief.
Well, I think that if it is evidence, then a belief with evidence can be justified. I think this is the way I explain it, and I might even have it somewhere in there. So this slide deck or whatever, I had did a presentation on this with for Ratio Christi with my students, and so I just thought, hey, I'll grab that presentation. That way we have some of these definitions, and there's some scripture verses in there, and I thought it would be kind of interesting to be able to test this out. Obviously you and I this is the maiden voyage, so we're learning here, but I define it like this: faith is the gap between evidence and certainty.
Mm-hmm.
Faith is the gap between evidence and certainty. So I may not have, I'm not certain to step out and say that I know something.
Right.
But I can say that I have faith in that thing, and it's not blind. It's not in the absence of evidence. It's just I'm not certain. I don't, and this is when we get on a plane, we have faith in the pilot because there's evidence that he has a license and he's been vetted. he's been hired and he gets paid and he's done it 1,000 times before, but we're not certain that that plane will land. So that is why we require faith. Same thing with the doctor analogy. You go under the knife because you have faith in that physician, but you're not certain that something catastrophic doesn't, happen. So that's where faith comes in. So that's kind of the distinction that I would make. It is there is a gap between, and from a Christian perspective, I often hear Christians talk about this topic and they butcher it in that respect. They will use faith kind of interchangeably with blind, and that's not what we mean. Even in the text, I can jump to the go ahead and comment on that, but
no. I see what you're saying, and I appreciate that. That's a very interesting distinction. It's kind of like how, yeah, I agree. I've never stepped onto an airplane and said, "By the way, may I see your qualifications?"
Yeah. Yeah.
That's an excellent point. It's one of the things that I've commented on in the past. I don't think in our previous conversations, but I've thought this before. While I would say that I would argue there was insufficient evidence to me to be convinced, but the most compelling evidence I've heard is the apostles who were willing to die for their beliefs. There are very few beliefs that I hold for which I would be willing to go a torture, especially a torturous death. I would recant, I'd pull a Galileo. I'd recant those in a heartbeat if it meant I was going to be able to live or not suffer. So that is probably the most compelling evidence that I've heard. So I would not say there was no evidence, but evidence that was insufficient to convince me.
Yeah. And I can relate to that, like in the sense that I feel like that's kind of with atheism. Like there are times where I hear a valid objection to God. I've gone through these kind of trials. I don't want to say trials of faith, but just questions that I didn't have an answer for. And so it causes me to be skeptical about my view. But then when I look at their view, there's so many unanswered questions and reasons for me not to take that next step, not to flip the switch into unbelief. So, it's like, okay, you're weighing the evidence on both sides. And so you have to have faith on both, from both perspectives. You have to have faith that there's no God, because there's not certainty there's no God. There's a lot of evidence. Maybe one can argue there's evidence that there's no God, but there's not certainty. So the gap, if we use the same definition from both of our perspectives, then there's a step of faith to get to atheism. There's a step of faith to get to, theism. And then like from an agnostic perspective, those people are just unwilling to take a step. So it's like, there could be a God, there's not a God. I'm in the middle. I'm not gonna assent to one or the other. Now, most of the time, agnostics live as though there is no God. So it's more of a I'm not willing to say there's not a God, but I'm not convinced, type of thing. And that's where you have more of like an agnostic atheist, which is the predominant view, I would say. Yeah,
that's what. So, by the way, that's what I would consider myself. I would not argue that there is evidence that there are no gods, but I have not seen any. I have not seen any evidence that I have considered compelling that there are gods or a god.
Well, and hopefully, that's why I enjoy these type of conversations, because it starts with clarifying what we mean when we say faith, and then it starts with clarifying what we mean when we say belief, and what that actually looks like. Kind of to your point earlier, like these guys believed Christianity to the point of death, and they were the ones who walked with Jesus. You know, that they were the ones who, if this was a faked, I don't know, the different, you have the 3 or 4 different theories. This was a mass hallucination theory. You have the disciples hid the body theory. If it was some type of conspiracy, then they would be the ones to know it, and they all, through persecution, through whether or not they were killed horrifically or not. I think there's tradition holds that they were, but through persecution, even, like, it wasn't like they became rich or powerful or famous. They literally were chased around horrific conditions, and still held to what they considered a firm belief in who Jesus said he was, and witnessing the miracles that they attested to, type of thing. So we can get into the evidence, in future conversations, because I like to take those one at a time, but it is a cumulative case. It's not, there's not one reason. Although that actually, you mentioned one of maybe my top 10 reasons for believing the Christian faith is the people who would have known that it was some type of conspiracy, had no good reason to hold to it if it was a conspiracy. Anyway, let's kind of moving on. Let's I kind of wanted to touch on this, because this actually is more for my Christian friends, if they happen to watch this, because I find this kind of interesting. Whenever someone asks you for a definition of faith, typically they go to the scripture, and they go to these couple of verses. If you're familiar with the Hebrew text, Hebrews 11, it's a they call it the Hall of Faith. So what happens after this verse is they go into like 30 something verses, and I don't remember exactly how many examples of Old Testament prophets, and then people who believe God, trusted him, and then what happens after. And so that in the beginning, there's like a whole bunch of these Old Testament prophets and characters of the Bible, and they believed God, and then X happened. They believed God, and X happened, and it was all prosperity type stuff, and they were prospered, and and then you get to the New Testament, and it's they believe God, and they suffered through persecution. And it's kind of an interesting transition, that your faith gets you through your good times, it grounds you, and then it also gets you through the difficult times, that you have a confidence moving forward. But my point is this: when you look at it, that's not a definition. This is a verse that is often quoted as a definition.
No, yes, and as I'm looking at it, they're just saying, they're assuming that you know what it is.
Yeah, this is and in churches, like, every sermon that I've ever listened to on faith, if they quote this verse, they call it faith is defined as, right? It's defined as, and I can see why it says faith is, but this is something that the Bible does often, and it actually instead of giving like a dictionary definition that we might be used to, like kind of what we just looked at the Webster's dictionary, but it gives what faith looks like applied. Yes. So this is, so, it's the confidence, in the different versions. That's why I put them in parentheses there. It says the assurance or confidence or substance of what we hope for. It's the certainty, and in other versions, it's the conviction or evidence of what we do not see. So that's not a definition. And one of the ways that I try and teach this is there's also a famous verse about love, and it talks about it's 1 Corinthians 13, and it says, love is patient and kind. Love does not envy or boast. That's not a definition either. And so 9 Christians out of 10, they may not know a lot of verses, but they know this one. It's read at every wedding.
That's read at every wedding, right?
Yeah. But it's not a definition. It's what love looks like applied. And so that's kind of what's going on with this faith verse that's used as a definition, but it's not. And so because you're talking, the Bible was written predominantly to a bunch of, uneducated people, the application was the proper way to teach, this is what it looks like practiced in real life. And so, and then there's examples, like specific examples given. And so, that's why past Hebrews 11, it dives into this like a litany. It's so cool. Like you should check it out when we're done, but it's like a litany.
What's that?
Hebrews 11. Yeah. Yeah. And it's like Abraham and all the patriarchs of the Old Testament. And then it gets into the New Testament and kind of, it's an example of how we should handle, how we should live by faith. So that's kind of cool because it's not in the absence of evidence. It's basically the author of Hebrews is saying, believe and trust God, because look what happens when all these other people have believed and trusted God. And that's a piece of evidence. That's not that for some people that might be compelling, for other people it may not. But it is a piece of evidence. And so that's kind of where we want to first clear up that it's not blind. It's not just believing something because the Bible tells you to. That's not where we're at. I love the Bible. I trust the Bible. I think the Bible is God's word. It's his revelation. But I understand what circular reasoning is.
Right.
And I understand that you can't say believe the Bible because the Bible says to believe the Bible. There's got to be a step beyond that or behind that. Thoughts? I'm sorry.
Right. So that's why I didn't mention why I was reading Luke right now. And that is because I wanted to start, since I've not read the whole Bible, I wanted to get much more of an understanding of the apostles' experiences, of what Jesus had said and whatnot. I read Mark first because it was the shortest. Okay, let's quick confession. It was quick and easy. I read that in like while washing the dishes. I was listening to it.
Yeah.
And then I wanted to do Acts, and I read and discovered that Acts is basically chapter 2 of Luke. And so I went back and started reading Luke. I wanted to read all about Paul's experience because we don't have any firsthand accounts from the apostles. The apostles didn't write the Gospels. And so I wanted to find out what Paul had said, and I was going to learn about his conversion on the road to Damascus in Acts, and that's why I'm in Luke right now. Luke's much longer. Luke, from what I've seen, looks like it's about, if you look at his book on tape, so to speak, it's about a 2.5-hour read to get through Luke before you advance to Acts. But Luke was, strike that. Paul was the one who had talked to the apostles, and I wanted to see what he had to say about their comments, about their experiences, because his letters are actually the oldest content in the New Testament. And so that's why I'm reading that right now, is to get up to the letters of Paul and find out what he had to say. I know Paul never met Jesus. He claims to have had a vision and whatnot. But he never met him firsthand, but he did meet the apostles. And so that's about the closest to eyewitness testimony that we've got. And so I was curious as to what he had to say about it. You were about to say something.
Well, I was just going to say that Paul's conversion is the closest we have to our conversion. Whereas, when you see the apostle accounts, they grew up with Jesus, whereas Paul was a persecutor of the church. He literally admits to killing Christians. he had this radical transformation. So in a similar fashion that the disciples who were killed for their faith, Paul had everything to lose, and he suddenly becomes this, devout, champion of the faith. It is compelling. But Luke was his kind of scribe, right?
Yeah, travel companion,
yeah.
right? Is from what I understand, right?
Yeah. So he followed Paul around and basically tried to record what happened. And again, we're talking about a time. Actually, I'm not gonna go down that rabbit trail because it really is a diversion. But I'm trying to stick to the faith topic. We should look at the disciples, which ones were closest to Jesus, which ones were like Peter has letters, but he doesn't have a gospel. That type of thing. So we should definitely dive into that. But let's try and stick to faith, just so I don't know how this recording, how long it's going to be, how much data it's gonna bring in. But look, I will say this: saying you need to believe and having the evidence sufficient for you to take that first step is a legitimate requirement, right? Like, if I couldn't ask someone to just believe something without evidence, but you have to weigh it. And this is something so this is a bit of a criticism to skeptics. They are extraordinarily skeptical about the Christian worldview or theism, but not skeptical about their own. That there is so much that they will just either kind of a the old saying, there's a God of the gaps. You're just plugging in God into this gap, and you just trust that that's the answer. Well, skeptics do this quite often with time or evolution, or we don't know, but we can just plug in faith into, science or evolution or whatever word, given enough science, we're going to figure it out. And so that they just have all these unanswered questions, and that's okay. I mean, we're not going to have answers to everything. I'm not trying to pretend that we will. However, we make decisions and we decide where we fall on a particular topic based on the evidence we have. And until something changes, until we get some of these bigger questions answered, then I have to act and live based on based on the information that I currently have in front of me. And that's where the faith comes in. You're operating in faith, whether you're operating as a atheist or an agnostic or as a Christian, because we don't know if there's something beyond the material world. And that's often the way I frame it. You can say that matter and energy are all that exists because I get my information from science. But science is an epistemology that studies the natural world, and in the natural world, they're only concerned with matter and energy. So you're effectively limiting yourself to a tool that will only find the answer that you want to find. So
it will only find the answers that it assumes from the beginning exist.
Yeah, exactly. And so
I see that point. I think that what I would love for future conversations is to have even things that we could read over in advance, because I don't remember the exact name. Give me 1 second and I'll find it. What's it? Natural religion. Who was it? Hume?
David Hume?
Yes.
Yeah, he's
the natural history. Dialogues Concerning Natural Religion. That was the one that by David Hume that when I read that kind of encapsulates what I had experienced in my exposure to Christopher Hitchens or Richard Dawkins, when the arguments that Hitchens used to make before he passed were, even if we were to grant the existence of a God, you would still have all your work ahead of you to arrive at
The Christian God.
Christianity or Islam or Judaism. And that would be a book that I would love for us to discuss, and it's a short read. And I'm happy to read, Hebrews and you said the letters of Peter.
Well, I was just using that as an example. Like he's a disciple, but he doesn't have a gospel. Like, you know what I mean? He didn't write a gospel. He was kind of the leader of the church to the Jews, and then Paul later became the Gentile kind of leader.
Right, the leader for the Gentiles.
Yeah. But at any rate, yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
So these have been. So I found Hume's conversations on this, or you'd written it as a dialogue, to capture what I believe after growing up reading and watching Carl Sagan, and later the remake of Cosmos was done in watching these sorts of things that explained how the universe came to be from a scientific perspective. And
yeah, Carl Sagan has the great quote that it's like the universe is all there is and ever will be. The intro to that, and it really kind of lays out what I was just talking about. Is if you assume that the universe is all there is and ever will be, and then you limit your epistemologies to science, which is a study of the natural world, which is matter and energy.
Right.
The only answer you can possibly come up with is a naturalistic answer. And my pushback on that is actually ask yourself if the matter and energy can explain the world around us. That's the question. Can simple matter and energy, is that effective enough or sufficient is the right word? Is that sufficient to explain the world in which we live in? And as many times as I've had conversations with atheists, I don't think they ever ask themselves that question. I not genuinely. It's one of those kind of assumptions that are just kind of built into their starting point, and that's where it takes me about 30 seconds to figure out if they've thought beyond, or if they've thought about that question. Like, is matter and energy sufficient to explain things like, reason, love, consciousness, morality, these type of if matter and energy, does matter and energy have a beginning? If it doesn't, then, or if it does, then if something if only matter and energy exists, then what produced matter and energy to begin with? I mean, you've heard these arguments.
Right. And these are exactly, and what you basically just did, if you go back and write it down, you came up with about 12 additional podcast conversations for us.
That's exactly right.
Because it would be difficult. This conversation would go on for days covering all of these different topics. And these are exactly the sorts of things that I love to think about, and the things that I love to discuss. This is why you and I met, was because I had joined a Facebook group to learn more. What got me so interested in revisiting Christianity, I read a while back the book called The Gnostic Gospels by Elaine Pagels, and she talked about basically the gospels that were not included in the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
And the interesting thing for me was her study of this is what helped deepen her faith. And my reading of her book is what finally moved me from agnostic to atheist.
Mm-hmm. Well, and
When
that is, and part of those things are interesting because I do think that a lot of times that happens because we misunderstand what the claim is. And I'm not saying you did or she did. I'm simply saying that, like, clearly defining what faith is incredibly important. And yet, how many times do you talk to a Christian or a skeptic and they don't even know? Like, if in your mind faith is actually the absence of proof, then yeah, faith is or I'm sorry, the absence of evidence, then yeah, it's silly to have faith. That is a that's a vice. That's not a good thing.
right.
Believing something without evidence
Right, it
is
should not be
not
lauded.
good. Yeah, but yet that's just it's an equivocation on the definition, and so we have to then say, okay, what is actual faith? What are they actually saying? And I think if once you do that, then the whole conversation becomes a lot more reasonable, because now we can actually debate the evidence as opposed to just trying to say you believe things blindly. And
Right.
and I think that's step number one, is put everybody on the same. And I'm not saying, okay, this is something I wanted to get into, but I don't know if we have time. We probably need to kind of wrap it up. But maybe next time we can talk about it, or if you have a quick comment. The burden of proof is on both sides to prove their worldview true. Now, that doesn't mean that I can simply say to you, when you say, show me the evidence of God, I can simply say to you, show me the evidence there's no God. That's not what I mean by that. But I do mean that when you have a worldview, a comprehensive view of how the world operates, then you have as much burden to show that materialism is all that exists as I do to say that there's something beyond materialism. And that's where we can come together and say, okay, let's put all of our cards on the table, all of our evidences from science, from philosophy, from human experience, from intuition, all these things, put them on the table, and let's decide where should we take that leap of faith? Should we take the leap of faith into uncertainty and just, well, we don't know? Or should we base it on the evidence we have now and take a leap of faith into some type of theism? Is there enough evidence to go further than that? All that's what I hope we can do through these conversations. And who knows, it could lead to some interesting conversations and maybe even advance the overall narrative that we can have respectful, productive conversations. Yeah,
exactly. And that would be my goal through it. Like I would if Christianity gives someone comfort, no matter what their level of faith or evidence is, it is absolutely not my goal to rip that comfort away. I remember we were at a funeral, and one of the things that I was talking about with my wife is I absolutely love the way Catholic funeral processions work. Especially for me, what struck me is pallbearers. The pallbearers are supposed to be close friends. They are not supposed to be those that were most impacted by the passing of that person. And the symbolism that our friends are helping those most effective literally carry the load, I thought was beautiful. Absolutely, absolutely beautiful, to help them get through what is going to be one of the most disruptive experiences of their lives, the survivors. And I do not want to rip away the faith of those people that are doing that. This is much more philosophical discussions and conversations on how I've arrived at the conclusions that I have for the time being. I was once a believer, and I'm not certain that I'm going to remain an atheist, although I strongly suspect that's the case. But in the conversations that I've had and whatnot, I find this stuff. Is there a more important question to answer
Yeah.
while we're alive? You know,
Yeah.
if there are gods and they have strong opinions on our behaviors, that would be pretty important to know. So yeah, I think that you have a good um, laundry list of topics for future conversations for us, as well as keeping each other busy with our reading lists.
Yeah. And I want to just say, I don't want to rip your unbelief from you either. So if, there's somebody out there that is comforted by the fact that their behaviors will not come to be judged, then, and so they can do what they want when they want, for, they can live a life for themselves. I'm not saying you, I'm simply saying that
No, I get it.
that comfort can works in both direction. I mean, what matters is not if we're comforted. In my opinion, what matters is what's true. And so we're gonna go down that journey, and I'm excited to do it with you. I think you're a respectful guy, and that's we can have a cool intellectual conversation. We're not going to be offended, and yet we can kind of push the envelope a little further. So with that, let's close. This time I'm going to turn off the recording here, and
Okay.
I don't know how long we went, but stop recording. There we go.